Hi everyone, hope you're well. So I'm going to get straight to the point here. This video is about racism and I guess how we see racism in society in 2023, specifically about the glaring double standards and how this is approached. So I'll just read out the article. It's not excessively long, so bear with me. This is from GP News, the print edition, online edition, as opposed to like a video segment. The story is by Georgina Cutler. A London theatre is facing backlash after organising a blackout event. White people are urged not to attend. The Theatre Royal Stratford East in East London aimed to create a safe, private space to allow an all-black identifying audience to explore race relations free from the white gaze. In other words, segregation. Organisers of the play said white patrons should not go to the performance of Tambo and Bowens on July the 5th. The Blackout event is one of a run of 29 performances and is described as a distorted minstrel show meets a hip-hop concert. So I don't know, I assume this is going to be playing at other theatres as well. Maybe it's just the one venue. GB News presenter Nana Akua has branded the idea racist, adding that can't complain about racism and then be a racist yourself. I think that's missing. You can't complain about racism and then be a racist yourself. My point is quite simple. You can't have it both ways. You can't complain about racism and then be a racist yourself, which is what this is about. It's racist, she said. And she's absolutely right. Let's imagine, if you will, a theatre performance that urged black people not to come. Race baiters like Dr. Shola would be out forced to cry racism. I don't actually know who that's a reference to, but imagine he or she is one of the people promoting this. So why is it allowed the other way around? You can't have it both ways. The organisers saying the idea of the event is to create a safe private space for an all-black identifying audience to explore race-related issues. More like a pass to be racist, and although they claim no one is excluded, it's quite clear that if you don't identify as black, you won't be welcome with open arms. Wanjiru Najoya, a senior law lecturer at the University of Exeter, echoed Akua as she criticised the idea that there's good racism and bad racism. If white people did a show and excluded black people for one night only, there would be an outcry, she told the Times. They wouldn't like it if anyone was racist to them. Why did they think it's okay to be racist to white people? The concept of blackout nights began on Broadway in 2019. Surprise, surprise, I'll come back to that. With Slave Play, written by Jeremy O'Harris before the idea was brought to London's Almeida Theatre with his show Daddy. Matthew Shea, director of Tambo and Bowens, argued it was imperative the theatre created a space where black theatregoers could explore complex, nuanced race relations issues. Trevor Phillips, former chairman of the Equality and Human Rights Commission, has backed the director as he described it as fine and lawful. I'm disappointed by that, actually. If I'm around, I think I might go and see how it works, he said. The Theatre Royal Stratford East said that while the event had been arranged for a black audience, no one is excluded from attending, it said. Just to go back to Trevor Phillips, I've just double read that now. I'm surprised by him. Usually he comes out with quite reasonable positions on race relations, but he must be able to see the double standards in this. Now, there's a lot of things to digest with this one. Firstly, I've checked out this guy, Matthew Shea, who's the director. Surprise, surprise, he has no white friends on his social media, none that I could see. It was entirely black faces. So the guy is clearly an identitarian. I'm just going to call him what he is. I think he's a racist. I'm disappointed by Trevor Phillips. Like I say, usually he comes out with quite reasonable positions on race relations. I'm surprised he takes that position of justifying it. He must be able to see, he's a smart guy, he must be able to see the double standards of this. But, other black people, like Nana Akua and others, fair play to them for calling out this for what it is. The principle here is quite simple. If a white director done the same thing, unquestionably, they would face a huge backlash, potentially violent threats. I say that because history shows it, that the sensitivities around white racism are such that, naked white racism today does get a very heated backlash. but there's clear double standards. Now, it's worth noting that there has been a lot of people responding to this, as you can imagine. The story itself, I don't know if this is a barometer of anything particularly, but 17 thumbs up, 541 thumbs down. Now, I'm going to hazard a guess, based on the comments I've been reading, that those 541 comments down are basically disgust and anger that this blatant anti-white racism is seemingly getting a free pass. Now, the theatre may put the disclaimer that anyone's allowed to come, like a legal disclaimer, and maybe that's what Phillips is talking about, because technically they're not saying you're not allowed to enter the building. But the message is clearly racist. And, if you're a white patron and maybe you're interested in this performance, you're not going to feel welcome. If you know in advance that they've said don't come. It reminds me a bit of that ghastly book, Why I No Longer Talk to White People About Race, by Rennie Ado Lodge, and then you have woke idiots like Emma Watson lapping it up. I mean, it's literally saying, do not read my book, or I don't want to talk to you because of the colour of your skin. Quite honestly, I'm sick and tired of minority racists getting a free pass. And I think some of the worst racists around are black identitarians, because they seem to think that their attitude is somehow progressive. Now, I mentioned that this began on Broadway in 2019. I think a lot of the divisiveness that we see is actually American import. It's come from the American left. The term white privilege originates from the American left. I forget her name now, but it was an academic back in I think it was the 80s, who coined that term. It might have been the 90s. I don't remember off the top of my head. But the point is, it came from the United States. A lot of these ideas are coming from the American left. I'm not saying that we don't have that sort of regressive left attitude in the UK as well, but I do think a lot of it is fostered from that American base, and I would like to see less of it. Um, like I say, the theatre may have that disclaimer of anyone can come, just as a legal cover, so that they can say, oh, well, technically we're not discriminating. But the message is blatantly racist. I think it's hate mongering. I really do. I think it's a segregationist attitude. I think it's stirring up animosity towards white people, because it insinuates that all white people are the enemy and black people can only feel safe if they're with other black people. That's a segregationist mindset. Um, I think it's utterly toxic. And it's not good enough to say, oh, well, we're not actually stopping you from coming. The point is, you're not making white people feel welcome. Now, I'll be honest, I've contacted this guy, Matthew Shea, and told him exactly what I think of him. I wasn't reckless, I didn't threaten him or anything like that, I wouldn't do that. I told him I think he's a racist. Um, and the fact that he thinks he can justify this, it's just, it's imperative that we have a safe space. What a safe space to be racist? I mean, the question is, why do they want a black only? Is it because some of the prologue is going to be, blatantly racist against white people? The question is why? Why? I just think it's very sad that this still exists, that these sort of regressive mindsets are still out there and they're promoted. Um, I'm sorry, I know this is the third time I've mentioned it, but when I was initially looking at the report, I saw Trevor Phillips mentioned. I thought he was going to be one of the critics. So to read that he supports it, I'm saddened by that, because I think he's a smart guy and he usually comes out on the side of common sense. Technically, it may not be breaking any laws, but he must be able to see that it's promoting double standards. He must be able to see why this would be galling to a lot of people, and not just white people. I mean, Asian people. This isn't just an anti-white thing. What if Asian patrons wanted to attend? Someone of East Asian heritage, they're not black. Would they be allowed to attend? Would they be made to feel welcome? So I'm disgusted by the fact that this, gets a free pass. And I think the theatre should face a backlash peacefully. I think if they have charity funding, it should be stripped. I think a charity, or something that has charity status, that promotes a racist message, should lose all government funding. Absolutely. Or lose its charity status. When I'm saying government funding, I'm talking about in the arts. I think there has to be consistency. There has to be. Because This sort of racism, it's not necessarily the thuggish kind of racism where, you get drunk louts will attack someone because of the colour of the skin. That's the sort of naked, ugly racism that is very obvious. Well, actually, anyone with a brain can see that this racism is obvious as well, but it's what I would call kind of academic racism. It's not dissimilar to, back in the 80s and 90s when you had the National Front thugs terrorising minority people. It was featured actually in the film The Empire of Light. There's a scene where the National Front attacks the cinema. If you've seen the film, you'll know the scene I mean. Now, that was just obvious thuggish racism, but at that time, and more recently still, you have the academic racists who would sort of, they would be Holocaust deniers, they would justify white supremacy, but they wouldn't be going out and beating people up. They were too smart for that. They weren't that sort of racist. They were still racist, but it was a different approach, a sort of more so-called academic approach. Of course, it's regressive, but I would make a comparison. I think a lot of black identitarians today, they're not going to go out and beat up white people. They're not going to openly say, I hate white people. But if you look at their narrative and if you look at the constant garbage that they come out with, it's absolutely hateful. It's absolutely divisive. And they cloak it all as empowering. They cloak it all as necessary for black people to be empowered. It's grotesque. It's absolutely grotesque. And it's people like that who I feel wedge divisions in society. I think that their message is toxic. Um, and I think they need to be told to their face that they're promoting racism. And this isn't a slip of the tongue. Where you can have a situation where someone in a moment's stupidity says something reckless, and maybe we could say, okay, that's a racist attitude. But when this is consistent, then you have to conclude, actually, they are a racist. It's not a question of this was a mistaken or, it's flawed. And the most infuriating thing about this is, often when white racists are called out, they sort of backtrack and say, oh, I didn't mean it, it was taken out of context, and they'll make excuses. And sometimes it's true and sometimes it isn't. But when black racists are called out, instead of showing any remorse or humility and accepting that they've offended a lot of people, they double down and they actually justify their racism. It's disgraceful. Then you get white woke types who enable it. An example of this was at the coronation when the black commentator, the actress actually from, I think she was from Bridgerton, she, made that infamous statement, it's a very white balcony, and there was a big public backlash against that. Now, the implication being, well, of course it's a white balcony, the royal family is a white family, as most British families are actually. But the galling thing about that is when she was actually going to make an apology, to be fair to her, she was going to make an apology. Um, the idiot at the BBC who was interviewing her actually said, you've got nothing to apologise for. So the BBC was actually delegitimising the contentions of those who were complaining. Many, many people. I am so, so sick of the double standards. Um, my whole life, I've called out white racists, and I will continue to do so. I've seen it. I've personally witnessed it. Here in Sunderland, I've seen white racists behave in a disgusting way, and I've called them out. I've protected minority friends. I'm not saying I swooped in like a hero, but I didn't let it go. As an example, there was one night I was walking back with some of my Chinese friends, and some drunk shouted something across the street, and I did confront them. In the end, my Chinese friends actually told me to leave it because I was losing my temper. I've seen it. So, no one needs to lecture me that there is not a problem out there with white racism. But there is a difference in that white racists are generally condemned and called out, and more often than not will face consequences for their racism. In football, for example, racist fans are rightly held to account. Someone said it's disproportionate actually because they could even face prison sentences, whereas you get violent assaults that don't face prison sentences. So again, I think when it comes to justice and it comes to values in society, it's so, so imperative that there is consistency, and there isn't. There isn't. What we basically have in 2023 is a situation where most decent people know that racism is wrong, yet somehow anti-white racism continues to get a free pass. And when people like me mention this, the attitude is basically, oh, well, you're a privileged white guy. You would, of course, say that. All I'm saying is let's have some consistency. You cannot complain about racism and say this is terrible, let's call it out, if you're going to turn a blind eye when it's happening to someone else because they happen to have a different colour of skin. Or this ridiculous notion, well, they're the majority, therefore they can't face hostility. You know, if you have a black majority neighbourhood and there's a white person or white people there, they're going to be the minority in that context. So it's a bit misleading to say, well, white people are the majority, so therefore they can never experience racism. It's a grotesque distortion of what can actually happen. And I think that minority racists get away with it. They manage to cloak it up as empowerment or giving black people a voice. They're toxic. And they need to be called out as the racists that they are. And they need to face the same contempt and the same sort of social isolation as any other racist would face. That's all I'm saying. I mean, I honestly think if this had been a white director, barring a black audience, it would be there would be an outcry, but it would go further than that. He or she would face a legal investigation, whether they'd actually broken the law or not. Um, Unquestionably, they would almost certainly be hounded out of the industry. They'd probably get violent threats. Um, well, indeed, we have a recent example of this. Look at the that Gollywog incident at the pub in Essex. Now, I'm not defending them. I don't think that those, dolls have any place in the 21st century. I think they are offensive for obvious reasons. They're a caricature of black people, regardless of what the origins are. They've long understood to be that, right? And I don't believe for a second that the publicans involved in that case are innocent. I think that they probably are bigots based on their background, based on what we know about them. There was a bit of controversy that there was the response was disproportionate. But to be honest, I think there was a little bit more than just the collywogs in the window involved there. But nevertheless, the point is there was consequences, right? They faced a backlash. Will this face an equivalent backlash? Probably not. There'll be a lot of people complaining about it online, but will actually anything change? They'll probably just get on with it and ignore the backlash. I think that's wrong. I think they need to face real, peaceful pushback against them for this. I hope that they face financial losses. I hope they take a big tumble. I really do. Because I don't think that a body or a company that is promoting that sort of message should be empowered. Um, I think they're fundamentally divisive. And it's just very, very sad in 2023 that there are people who will cloak up their own bigotry and racism as progressive. It's nonsense. It's segregationist. I would argue, it's black supremacist. Um, and it's unquestionably racist because it's treating all white people like the enemy. It's basically saying black people can only feel safe if it's only black people. Now, there may be some circumstances in society where you have a certain degree of, let's say, division, for want of a better term, that makes sense. For example, if you have a women's shelter, women there have been victims of severe domestic violence, it makes sense that, other women are working with them because they would be nervous around men. That's totally understandable. But that is a situation that makes a lot more sense than an artistic production, so called, that is basically saying white people are your enemy. It's disgusting, it's bigoted, and there has to be a consistent backlash. And I'm so, so sick of, why should it be down to GB News to call this out? This should be mainstream contention. I'm not saying the government should get involved in one dispute at one theatre, but I do think the Department for Media, Arts and Culture, or whatever the precise name of that department is now, it changes with each new government, but that department should be looking at pulling the funding of such venues that are promoting a racist narrative. And I'll say one more thing to close this video. Suella Braverman's job may be on the line due to her speeding offences. Now, I think Braverman's quite corrupt. I don't have a lot of sympathy for her, but I will give credit where credit's due. She has called out racist minorities. She has recently said that white people shouldn't feel collective guilt for the transatlantic slave trade. Fair play to her. You have a minority home secretary saying what needs to be said. It's the woke left keep pushing this divisive, toxic narrative, and they will never stop. They will not be happy until every white person has their head bowed in shame. They will not be happy until the entire country is made bankrupt by this sort of flagellating of history. Sometimes it's misplaced as well, where you even have, for example, companies that were established after the abolition of the slave trade are somehow being tied into it. It's a disgrace. And that's probably for a whole other video, but I really, really think that when the woke left say they're all about compassion and inclusiveness and progress, they're absolutely not. They're about divisiveness, inconsistency, and bigotry. But the bigotry is against white people, so that's okay. Um, I'm sure the organisers of this will find many ways to excuse it, and they'll no doubt try to smear their critics as being privileged white people. Of course, they're going to complain. No, just ordinary white people who are fed up of racist attitudes against them in general. Now, am I personally hurt by this situation? No, I don't live in London. I wouldn't go to the performance in the first place. But that is beside the point. The point is, if I wanted to, I would be made to feel unwelcome. That's the principle here. And it is so wrong. And it simply needs to be called out. And I hope the theatre faces a very real backlash.